It was just another ordinary day in a small, quiet town. The kind of town where nothing much happens, and everyone knows everyone else's business. But what happened on this day would change a young man's life forever. Imagine a busy, crowded bus, people rushing to get to their destinations, the sound of chatter and footsteps filling the air. Among them, a teenage boy sat, lost in his thoughts. He had a tough day ahead, but little did he know, fate was about to bring him face to face with a moment that would test his character, his kindness, and his understanding of the world around him. As the bus made its usual stops, a heavily pregnant woman stepped on board. She was clearly struggling, clutching her belly with one hand and holding the strap with the other. Her face showed signs of exhaustion, and the weight of her condition seemed to have taken a toll. The bus was packed, and seats were scarce. That's when the boy, without a second thought, stood up and offered her his seat. The gesture was simple, but there was something about it that seemed to resonate with those around him. The woman gave him a grateful smile, and as she settled into the seat, she glanced at him curiously. What happened next would leave both of them speechless. She handed him a small, folded note. He opened it slowly, unsure of what to expect. Inside, there were only a few words, but those words would change everything. "You have no idea how much this means to me," it read. And just as quickly as it had happened, she was off the bus, her journey continuing, leaving the boy staring at the note in disbelief. But what the boy didn't know was that this small act of kindness would lead him into a much bigger story. A story of hidden secrets, of strange feelings, and of a life-altering encounter that would bring him face to face with a mystery far bigger than he could ever imagine. The day had started like any other for a mother and her son, checking out of a motel on the outskirts of town. They had stayed the night, just passing through on their way to a new beginning, hoping for a fresh start. As they packed up and left, the room was left empty, the beds neatly made, the floor swept clean. But for the maid who walked into that room next, something felt off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was an energy in the air, a lingering presence that didn't seem right. Her instincts told her to check the bed, to make sure everything was in place. And when she did, that's when she found it, something hidden under the sheets. Something that would send her heart racing and her mind spinning. She froze, staring at the object, unsure of what to do next. Was it a sign? A warning? Or just a coincidence? Whatever it was, she knew she couldn't just ignore it. But what could it mean? Why was it there? In the meantime, the boy and the pregnant woman's paths would cross again in a way neither of them could have expected. The note had left a trace, a connection that would soon draw them into a story they never saw coming. And it all started with a single act of kindness. What was it about that boy? What did the note really mean? And what would the maid uncover under the sheets in that motel room? Stay tuned, because the truth is far stranger than they could have ever imagined. The day after the encounter on the bus, the boy, whose name was Jamal, couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. He'd been raised in a quiet, modest neighborhood where kindness was something his mother always taught him to hold on to. But he never expected that a simple gesture, standing up for a pregnant woman, would lead to such an unexpected twist. He couldn't stop thinking about the note she had handed him, and for some reason, it gnawed at him, as if there was something he was missing. Jamal was just an ordinary teenager, trying to make his way through high school while helping his mother with her small job at the local convenience store. Life had always been straightforward for him: school, work, home. Nothing extraordinary had ever happened. But that note felt like a spark, a strange whisper in his ear, as though his life might suddenly change in a way he couldn't yet comprehend. At home, Jamal's mother, Vanessa, noticed the shift in his demeanor. She could tell something was bothering him. Vanessa, in her early 30s, had spent her entire life fighting to keep a roof over their heads. She'd raised Jamal alone after his father had disappeared when he was just a baby. They were a team, always supporting each other through thick and thin. Her love for her son was immeasurable, and she could see that whatever had happened to him that day wasn't just a fleeting thought. "Jamal, what's going on with you?" she asked, breaking the silence as they sat at the kitchen table, their evening meal barely touched. Jamal hesitated, staring at the note, still folded up in his pocket. It felt like something big was about to happen, something he couldn't explain to his mom without sounding crazy. But at the same time, He knew she could sense his unease. "It's just, this woman on the bus," he said slowly. "She was pregnant, and I gave her my seat. She gave me this note, and I don't know. It just felt important, like it was meant for me. I don't know why, but it keeps sticking with me." Vanessa furrowed her brow. "A note? Jamal, you don't even know who she is. Maybe it's nothing. Sometimes people just do things out of kindness, and maybe it's just that simple." Jamal nodded, but he didn't believe that. The note had felt like a sign, a clue to something much bigger than he could understand. There had to be more to it than just that. What was she trying to say to him? And why did it feel like his entire day had been leading up to that one moment? Meanwhile, across town, the maid, whose name was Clara, was still trying to make sense of the strange feeling she'd had in the motel room. Clara had worked as a maid for years, cleaning rooms in motels and hotels across the town, but she had never felt the way she did after walking into that particular room. There was something eerie about it. Something off. When she had found the object hidden beneath the sheets, her heart had skipped a beat. It wasn't just a simple mistake, it felt deliberate, almost as though it had been placed there on purpose. Clara had worked in the motel for a long time and had seen her fair share of strange things: empty rooms that felt too quiet, items left behind that seemed out of place. But this was different. It wasn't just the object under the sheets, it was the entire atmosphere of the room. The air felt thick, charged with a kind of energy that unsettled her. The object she had found was a small, folded piece of paper, similar to the one Jamal had received from the pregnant woman. Clara was hesitant to touch it, but her curiosity got the better of her. She picked it up carefully, unfolded it, and read the words scribbled on the paper. The message was short and cryptic: "They're watching you. Be careful where you go next." Her stomach churned as she read it. It felt like a warning, a threat even. Who was watching, and what did they want from her? Clara's mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. She'd heard rumors about strange things happening at the motel, but she never thought much of them. Was this connected to Jamal's note? Was there some sort of pattern she hadn't noticed before? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of someone entering the hallway. It was the manager of the motel, a man named Greg, who always seemed a little too eager to brush things under the rug. "Clara, everything all right?" Greg asked, his voice a little too smooth, like he was trying to reassure her. Clara quickly shoved the note into her pocket and forced a smile. "Yeah, just a little tired," she replied, her voice betraying none of the unease she felt. "I'll finish up and head out soon." Greg nodded, but there was something about his eyes that didn't seem right. It was as if he was trying to read her, to figure out if she knew something she shouldn't. But Clara didn't have time to think about it. She had to get out of there. Something was happening, something strange, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was at the center of it all. Back in the small apartment, Jamal couldn't help but replay the events of the day in his mind. The woman, the bus, the note, it all seemed too bizarre to be a coincidence. But what if it was? What if he was just overthinking it? He tried to push the thoughts aside, but they kept creeping back, pulling him deeper into the mystery. The next morning, Jamal decided to return to the bus stop. He had no idea why, but something told him he had to go back. Maybe it was to see if the woman would be there again, maybe it was just to clear his head. Whatever the reason, he found himself standing there, waiting for the bus, his heart racing with anticipation. As he stood there, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to take a turn. But in what way? Would he learn something he didn't want to know? Or would he discover something that would change everything he thought he knew about himself? The bus pulled up, and Jamal stepped aboard. The air was thick with the same tension he had felt the day before. But the woman was nowhere to be seen. He sat in his usual spot, but his mind kept wandering back to that note. There had to be more to the story. Something was hidden beneath the surface, and he was determined to uncover it. Little did Jamal know, the truth was much closer than he realized, and his connection to the mystery was far deeper than a simple act of kindness on a crowded bus. As the bus moved forward, so too did the story that was about to unfold, one that would lead Jamal down a path he never expected, with consequences he could never have foreseen. Jamal sat quietly on the bus, the engine's hum filling the silence, his mind swirling with questions he didn't know how to answer. The pregnant woman hadn't shown up, and the more he thought about the note, the more unsettling it became. His fingers subconsciously tugged at the edge of his jacket, the fabric worn and frayed from years of use. He had always been careful with money, his mom had raised him to be resourceful, but the world around them had never felt quite so uncertain. Now, he felt as though he was teetering on the edge of something much larger than a simple act of kindness. He glanced out the window, watching the city pass by. The bus stopped at a corner, and a man with a briefcase boarded. He was tall, his face stern, but his eyes seemed to flicker for a brief moment when he saw Jamal sitting in his seat. Jamal didn't think much of it at first, but the man seemed to hesitate, as if debating whether to approach him or not. He moved toward the back of the bus instead, choosing an empty seat in the corner. But Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that the man had been watching him. He had a strange sensation that he had seen him before, though he couldn't place where. At the same time, Clara, the maid from the motel, was deep in thought. She had gone to the manager, Greg, to report the strange note she found in the room, but his response had only deepened her concern. "Don't worry about it," he had said with a forced smile. "Probably just some prank. We get all kinds of weird things around here." But Clara knew better. Something didn't sit right. Greg had been acting strangely ever since he started managing the motel. He was always too eager to brush things aside, to hide things under the rug. She didn't trust him, and now, after finding the note, that distrust had only grown stronger. She had been keeping an eye on him, watching how he interacted with the guests, the way he seemed to always disappear into the back office for long periods of time. She had never thought much of it, but now, the pieces didn't seem to fit. As the hours passed, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The town felt smaller, the streets narrower. She felt as though everyone she passed was a part of some greater story, some hidden web that she was too late to unravel. The more she tried to dig into the mystery, the more everything seemed to spiral out of her control. Back at Jamal's house, his mother, Vanessa, was feeling the weight of her own fears. She had always been the strong one, the protector, the one who held everything together for Jamal. But lately, something had been eating away at her. She could sense that her son was hiding something, that his quiet demeanor was a mask for something much bigger. She had raised him to be cautious, to trust his instincts, but she didn't want him getting involved in anything dangerous. And yet, she couldn't ignore the feeling that there was a storm coming, a storm she couldn't predict. One evening, as Jamal sat in his room staring at the note again, he heard a soft knock at his door. His mother stood in the doorway, her expression more serious than usual. "Jamal, I've been thinking about what happened on the bus, and I need you to be careful." He looked up at her, a little surprised. "I'm fine, Mom. It was just a note." Vanessa didn't move. She stayed in the doorway, her eyes steady. "It's not just the note, Jamal. It's everything. You've been acting differently. I can feel it. Something's going on, and I need to know what it is." Jamal sighed, leaning back against the chair. He wanted to tell her everything, the woman, the note, the strange feeling in the pit of his stomach. But he couldn't. "Not yet. I don't know, Mom. It just feels like something is about to happen. I'm not sure what, but it's like I'm part of something bigger now." Vanessa frowned, her brow furrowing in worry. "I've always told you to trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. But you have to promise me, no matter what happens, you'll stay safe. I can't lose you too." Jamal felt the weight of her words, and for a moment, he understood the fear that had always been in his mother's eyes. She had been afraid of losing him for so long, but he had never truly understood it until now. The world was full of unknowns, and those unknowns could hurt you if you weren't careful. The next day, Jamal couldn't stop thinking about what his mom had said. His instinct told him to find the woman from the bus, to ask her about the note, to figure out what it all meant. But something held him back. What if he was just overreacting? What if it was all nothing? He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that everything was connected, that the woman, the motel, the strange note, even the man on the bus, were all part of something that he was only beginning to understand. It wasn't long before he saw the man again. This time, he was standing outside the convenience store where Jamal's mother worked. He was talking to Greg, the motel manager. Jamal's pulse quickened. The man was talking to Greg as if they were old friends, laughing in a way that seemed too forced, too unnatural. Greg noticed Jamal watching from across the street and quickly turned his back. The man, however, locked eyes with Jamal for a brief moment, and that was all it took for Jamal to realize something wasn't right. There was a connection. A dangerous one. He turned and walked away, his mind racing. He had to get answers, but the more he tried to dig, the more tangled the web became. Why were these people, these strangers, suddenly showing up in his life? What did they want? And more importantly, why did he feel like he was being pulled into something he couldn't escape? Clara, too, was growing more desperate. She had been keeping tabs on Greg, but every time she got close, he managed to slip away, like smoke through her fingers. She knew something was happening behind closed doors, something dark, but she couldn't get close enough to expose it. Her instincts told her to dig deeper, but the deeper she went, the more she felt like someone was watching her. The tension was building. Jamal, Clara, and Vanessa were all unknowingly standing on the edge of a cliff, and the winds of fate were about to push them over the edge. But no one knew yet what lay beneath. Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Each passing day felt heavier, filled with an impending sense of dread. The man from the bus, Greg, the note, it all felt interconnected in a way he couldn't explain. His steps grew more cautious, and every corner he turned felt like it was hiding something, watching him. He started looking over his shoulder more, scanning the street for anyone who might be paying attention to him. His life, once so simple, was now filled with questions and shadows, none of which seemed to have any clear answers. One evening, he decided to follow the man from the bus. His gut told him that something was about to happen, something important that he needed to witness. He'd seen the man again at the store, speaking with Greg in hushed tones. Jamal's heart raced as he watched from a distance. There was something off about their conversation, like they were discussing more than just casual pleasantries. Jamal moved closer, trying to stay hidden behind a row of parked cars, when the man abruptly turned and headed down the alley behind the store. Jamal froze. This was his chance. He waited for a moment, heart pounding, then followed silently, careful not to make a sound. The alley was narrow, dimly lit by the flickering streetlights above. It felt like a different world back here, a world where everything seemed just a little too quiet, too still. As he crept further, he could hear muffled voices ahead. He moved closer, peering around the corner. There, standing in the shadows, were Greg and the man, but they weren't alone. A third figure stood with them, partially obscured by the darkness. Jamal couldn't make out the person's face, but the silhouette alone was enough to send a chill down his spine. There was something about the way they moved, calm, deliberate, as if they knew exactly what they were doing. The three of them were talking in low, urgent tones, and Jamal strained to hear their conversation. "It's too risky," Greg said, his voice tight with tension. "They won't just let it slide. They're watching us." Jamal's breath caught in his throat. Who was they? And why was Greg so nervous? He leaned in closer, careful not to make a sound. The man nodded. "We don't have a choice. It's time. We can't wait any longer." Jamal's heart pounded in his chest. His gut told him this was it, whatever they were planning, it was coming to a head now. But what was it? What were they preparing for? The third figure, still concealed in the shadows, stepped forward, and Jamal could make out a few words before the conversation grew too quiet. "It's the boy. He's getting too close. We have to handle him before it's too late." The mention of the boy made Jamal's blood run cold. Was this about him? What did they know about him? And who exactly were they talking about? His mind raced as he backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. His legs were trembling, and his thoughts were scattered. He needed to get back to his mother. Whatever this was, it was bigger than him now. These people, Greg, the mysterious man, the figure in the shadows, they were all part of something that had been unfolding long before he had ever stepped into this mess. Meanwhile, Clara, who had been quietly observing Greg, was beginning to piece together a disturbing truth. She had seen Jamal's face once before, back when he had helped the pregnant woman on the bus. There was something about him, something familiar. The more she watched, the more she realized that Jamal was tangled up in whatever dark web Greg and the others were trying to keep hidden. She had always known that there were things going on behind the scenes at the motel, but the deeper she dug, the more she realized that the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. One night, after her shift, Clara stayed behind to snoop around the motel's back office. She had been careful not to arouse suspicion, but the feeling of being watched lingered as she cracked open a drawer she knew she shouldn't. Inside, she found a stack of papers, documents that made her blood run cold. They were filled with strange codes, addresses, and names. But what struck her the most was the last page, a photograph. It was a picture of Jamal, but he wasn't alone. In the background, she recognized the figure standing just behind him. It was the same mysterious man she had seen earlier, talking to Greg. Clara's heart sank. What were they planning for Jamal? Clara knew she couldn't just walk away now. There was no turning back. But every step she took toward the truth only seemed to lead her further into a tangled mess. The note she had found in the motel room, the strange documents, the shady meetings, it was all connected. And Jamal was right in the middle of it. The next day, Jamal tried to talk to his mother, but the words wouldn't come. He needed her help, but how could he explain what he'd just discovered? How could he make her understand the danger they were in? The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he truly knew. He had no idea who these people were or what they wanted, but he couldn't ignore the fact that they were after him. That night, as Jamal walked home, he caught sight of a familiar figure standing across the street. It was the man again, the one who had been talking to Greg, but this time, he wasn't alone. Two others stood beside him, their faces hidden by hoods. Jamal's pulse quickened. They were waiting for him. Jamal's first instinct was to run. But something in his gut told him that running would only make things worse. He had to confront them. He had to understand what they wanted, why they were coming after him. He walked toward them slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. As he crossed the street, the man stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You've been asking questions you shouldn't, Jamal," the man said quietly. "And now you're involved in something much bigger than you realize." Jamal took a step back, but his voice remained steady. "What do you want with me? What is this all about?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the others, as if waiting for a signal. Jamal felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "You'll find out soon enough," the man said finally. "But I'm afraid it's too late for you to walk away now." Jamal's stomach tightened. He was no longer just a bystander in this twisted game. He was in the middle of it, and the stakes were higher than ever. The pieces were falling into place, but the truth was still just out of reach. What did they want from him? Why was he being dragged into this? And what would happen if he couldn't escape the web they had woven around him? With every moment that passed, the tension only grew. Something was coming, and Jamal could feel it closing in, like the eye of a storm ready to unleash its fury. The next day, as Jamal walked home from school, he noticed something that sent a jolt of unease through his entire body. At the corner of the street, where he usually crossed to get home, he saw the man from the bus again. This time, he wasn't alone. The man was talking to a woman, someone Jamal didn't recognize. She had short, blonde hair, and her eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses. Her demeanor was calm, but there was something about her that made Jamal's heart beat faster. The way she looked around, as if expecting someone, gave her away. She didn't belong here. Not in his neighborhood. Jamal instinctively moved away from the scene, his heart pounding. He ducked into an alley to avoid being seen, but the questions in his mind multiplied. Who was she? What was she doing with the man? And why was she watching him? As he continued down the alley, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling, he nearly bumped into someone. He looked up, startled, to find Clara standing in front of him, her expression tense, almost frantic. "Jamal, we need to talk," she said quietly, glancing around as if she didn't want anyone to overhear. Her voice trembled slightly, and Jamal could sense the urgency in her tone. "What's going on, Clara?" Jamal asked, his pulse racing. He hadn't expected to run into her here, and something about the way she was acting only deepened his suspicion. Was she involved in this too? Clara hesitated for a moment, then leaned in closer. "You're in danger," Jamal. I don't know how much you've figured out, but there are people who are watching you. They know who you are. They've been keeping track of everything you do. Jamal stared at her, unable to comprehend what she was saying. Who are these people? What do they want with me? Clara glanced over her shoulder again before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know exactly, but I've seen them. I've been following Greg, and there's something going on at the motel. There's a whole operation behind it, and it's connected to you somehow. I don't know why or how, but they're tracking you. And if we don't figure this out soon, you'll be in serious trouble. Jamal's mind was spinning. The fact that Clara knew about Greg and the motel only made things worse. Was she involved in this too? And why was she suddenly warning him? But why now? Why haven't you said anything before? Clara looked down, her face pale. Because I wasn't sure. But then I found something that made me realize how deep this goes. And you need to know, Jamal, there's more to this than just some strange note. Whatever is happening, it's bigger than both of us. And we can't just wait for it to come to us. Jamal didn't know what to say. The words she was speaking were too much to process all at once. It felt like his life had been turned upside down in a matter of days, and now there was no way out. He couldn't go to the police. They wouldn't believe him. And Clara, he wasn't sure who to trust anymore. But there was one thing he knew for certain, he couldn't ignore this any longer. I need to find the woman, Jamal said, more to himself than to Clara. The one from the bus. She's connected to this, I know it. Clara looked at him with concern. I don't think that's a good idea. They're watching you, Jamal. If you try to track her down, they'll know exactly where to find you. I don't care, Jamal replied, determination setting in. I have to know what this is about. Why it's happening. Clara shook her head, clearly frustrated. You're not listening. This isn't something you can solve on your own. There's too much at stake here. We don't know who we're dealing with. Jamal's voice was firm now, his mind made up. I don't care what it takes. I'm finding out the truth. Before Clara could respond, Jamal turned and walked away, his mind set on his plan. He knew it was risky. He knew it was dangerous. But there was no going back now. He had to find the woman, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. Meanwhile, Vanessa had been growing increasingly worried about her son's behavior. She had noticed the changes in him, how withdrawn he had become, how often he seemed lost in thought. She didn't know what was going on, but she felt in her bones that something was wrong. And now, with Clara's cryptic warning ringing in her ears, she couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was happening, something she couldn't protect Jamal from, and the thought terrified her. That evening, after Jamal had gone to bed, Vanessa found herself standing in the doorway to his room, watching him sleep. She wanted to reach out to him, to comfort him, but she didn't know how. He had always been so strong, so independent, and now he was caught in something he didn't understand. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Vanessa jumped, startled, and quickly turned to see who it was. When she opened it, she was surprised to find Greg standing there, his expression friendly but guarded. Vanessa, he greeted her, his voice smooth. I just wanted to check in. I know things have been tense lately, with the motel and everything. I thought you might appreciate a little distraction. Vanessa's gut churned. She had never liked Greg, but she had never trusted her instincts about him until now. There was something about him that felt off, like he was hiding something. I'm fine, Greg. But thank you, Vanessa replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Greg stepped closer, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than she was comfortable with. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I'm always around. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Vanessa nodded curtly, and before she could close the door, Greg gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, one that made her heart skip a beat. As she shut the door, a sense of dread washed over her. Something was happening. Something bad. And she had no idea how to stop it. The web was closing in around them, tightening with each passing day. Jamal, Clara, and Vanessa were all playing their parts in a dangerous game, each of them unaware of how deeply they were entwined. They were caught in a storm that was brewing, a storm that was about to break, and none of them were ready for what was coming. The following morning, Jamal's determination didn't waver. He couldn't get the image of the woman from the bus out of his head. His instincts screamed that she held the key to everything: the note, the motel, Greg, and whatever shadowy figures were lurking just out of sight. He had to find her. But first, he needed more information. He spent the morning combing through the streets, hoping for a lead, retracing his steps from that day. He walked the same route he'd taken when he'd first seen her, near the convenience store. He talked to a few people along the way, hoping someone had seen something, anything. But no one had. It was as if the woman had disappeared completely. Feeling frustrated, Jamal sat down on a bench near the bus stop, running his hand through his hair. Maybe he was overthinking things. Maybe he was chasing shadows. But something inside him wouldn't let go of the nagging feeling that everything was connected. The people, the notes, the strange encounters. They weren't coincidences. That's when he saw the man again. The same tall man with the briefcase who had been on the bus. This time, he wasn't alone. He was standing in front of a nondescript building, a building that Jamal had never noticed before. It was a little rundown, tucked away between two other shops, with faded paint and boarded-up windows. Jamal's heart raced as the man entered the building, disappearing into its shadowy interior. Jamal stood up quickly, his pulse quickening. He knew he had to follow. But he had to be careful. This wasn't just some random encounter, it was part of something bigger. He couldn't risk being seen. He couldn't risk making a mistake. As he moved to follow, a familiar voice called out to him. "Jamal." It was Clara. She was standing a few feet away, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Clara, what are you doing here?" Jamal asked, trying to keep his voice low. "I saw you, Jamal," she whispered urgently. "I know what you're doing. I have to warn you. You can't go in there. Not today. Not now." Jamal frowned. "What are you talking about? I have to find out what's going on. We're running out of time." Clara shook her head. "You don't understand. I've been watching the motel, the manager, the people coming and going. It's not just a motel, Jamal. It's something else. Something they don't want anyone to know." Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" Clara glanced over her shoulder before pulling Jamal aside, her voice trembling. "Greg isn't just the motel manager. He's been working with them. The people in the building. The ones who are tracking you. And it's worse than I thought." She paused, as if trying to find the right words. "They're involved in something dangerous, Jamal. They've been monitoring people, tracking their every move. And you're part of their plan. You were never just an accident." Jamal's mind spun. "What do you mean, I was never an accident? What is this? Why me?" Clara's face twisted with frustration. "I don't have all the answers, but I know this much. They're using you. And they've been using people like you for years. You've been caught up in something you can't even begin to understand." Before Jamal could ask more, Clara grabbed his arm and pulled him down an alley. "We need to get out of here. They'll come looking for us if we don't leave now." Jamal's heart raced. He wanted to ask more questions, to demand the truth, but something told him that if he stayed in one place for too long, it could all spiral out of control. Without saying a word, he followed Clara through the winding streets, away from the building, away from the danger. Back at home, Vanessa's instincts were on edge. She had spent the morning trying to get in touch with Jamal, but he wasn't answering his phone. She was starting to panic, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. It had been days since she had first noticed something was wrong, but now it felt as if the darkness was closing in on her family. That evening, as she sat alone in the kitchen, a knock at the door made her jump. She stood slowly, her hand shaking as she reached for the door handle. When she opened it, she was not expecting to see Greg standing there again, his face unreadable. "Vanessa," he said, his voice calm but unnerving. "We need to talk. It's about your son." Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, about my son? What's going on?" Greg stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his gaze flicking around the room before settling on Vanessa. "I know you're worried. You've been asking questions, looking into things you shouldn't. It's not safe for you or Jamal to keep digging." Vanessa stood her ground. I want to know what's going on. I want to know what you've been hiding. Greg's smile didn't reach his eyes. You're too late, Vanessa. There's no stopping it now. Vanessa's blood ran cold. She had no idea what he was referring to, but she could feel the weight of his words like a shadow hanging over her. Whatever was happening, it was escalating quickly, and she couldn't protect Jamal from it anymore. Meanwhile, Jamal was feeling the walls close in around him. Clara had insisted on keeping him hidden for the time being, but Jamal knew he couldn't stay in hiding forever. He had to find answers. The mystery was consuming him. The pieces of the puzzle were almost there, he could feel it. The building he had followed the man to, the strange woman, the note, it was all connected. And somehow, he was at the center of it all. As they moved through the dark streets, Clara's voice broke through his thoughts. You need to stay alert, Jamal. They know you're getting close. The closer you get to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes. Jamal nodded, but his resolve was unwavering. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to turn back now. Whatever the truth was, he had to find it. The storm was coming. And this time, there would be no hiding from it. Jamal's heart was pounding as he and Clara moved swiftly through the dark alleyways. Every step felt like it was leading them closer to something they both feared and needed to understand. They arrived at the building where the man with the briefcase had disappeared earlier. The street was eerily quiet, and the only sound was their hurried footsteps. Clara turned to Jamal, her face pale. This is it, she whispered. Everything you've been wondering, it's all in here. But be careful. Once we go inside, there's no turning back. Jamal nodded, the weight of her words settling heavily on his chest. He had come this far, and he couldn't stop now. He pushed open the door, which creaked loudly, and they stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of old wood and stale air made Jamal's stomach turn. As they moved deeper into the building, the sound of muffled voices grew louder. They reached a door at the end of the hallway. Clara paused for a moment, glancing nervously at Jamal. This is the room, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Everything you need to know is behind this door. Jamal took a deep breath and turned the handle. The door swung open, revealing a dimly lit office. Papers were scattered across the desk, and in the corner of the room, a large screen blinked with static. The man with the briefcase was standing by the desk, talking to someone in a low voice. Greg. Jamal's blood ran cold. The motel manager was there, his face unreadable. It didn't take long for Greg to notice their presence. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second, but then he quickly masked his surprise with a forced smile. Well, look who's decided to join the party, Greg said, his voice casual but tense. Jamal's hands clenched into fists. What's going on here, Greg? What are you involved in? Why is everyone lying to me? Greg chuckled darkly, but there was no humor in it. You've been asking the wrong questions, Jamal. You think this is about you? This isn't about you at all. It's much bigger than that. The man with the briefcase stepped forward. His face was familiar now. Jamal realized it was the same man who had been on the bus, who had looked at him with cold, calculating eyes. It's true, Jamal, the man said. You're not just some random person caught in the middle of this. You're part of a much larger plan. Jamal's mind raced, trying to process the chaos unfolding in front of him. A plan? What plan? What do you want from me? Greg's expression darkened. It's not what we want from you. It's what you're going to give us. Before Jamal could ask more, Clara stepped forward. Don't listen to them, Jamal. They've been manipulating you from the start. They knew about you long before today. The man with the briefcase smirked. She's right, Jamal. But what she doesn't know is that you've always been part of this. You're the key to unlocking everything. Jamal's pulse quickened. What do you mean, I'm the key? What are you talking about? Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. You've been chosen. Not by us, but by them. They've been tracking you, watching your every move since you were born. You're part of a larger experiment, a plan to change the future. The man with the briefcase nodded slowly. You're more important than you realize, Jamal. Your life, your choices, they're all interconnected with something far greater than anything you can imagine. We didn't want to involve you, but now it's too late. Jamal's head spun. Who are you people? Who is they? Greg's smile grew wider. You really don't know, do you? You've been living in the dark for so long, but now, it's time to open your eyes. There was a sudden crash from the back of the room, and the door swung open. Jamal's heart skipped a beat when he saw his mother, Vanessa, standing in the doorway. She looked determined, her face a mixture of fear and anger. Mom! Jamal shouted, rushing toward her. Vanessa's eyes were locked on Greg, and her voice was calm but filled with a quiet fury. I knew you were involved in something, Greg. But I didn't think it would go this far. Jamal's confusion grew. What is going on, Mom? What's happening? Vanessa stepped forward, her expression hardening. I've known about them for years, Jamal. I didn't want you to get caught up in it. But now, it's too late. Jamal looked back at Clara, who was shaking her head. No. This doesn't make sense. How could you have known? Vanessa's gaze softened, and for the first time, she looked like the mother Jamal had always known. I've been trying to protect you. But they've been watching us, watching you, for longer than you can imagine. Greg's voice cut through the air. You don't understand, Vanessa. It's already happening. There's no turning back. Jamal is part of the plan, and so are you. Jamal's heart raced. What plan? What are you going to do with me? The man with the briefcase stepped forward again. We're not going to do anything to you, Jamal. You're the one who's going to do something for us. Something that will change everything. Before anyone could say another word, the screen on the desk flickered to life, and a face appeared, someone Jamal had never seen before. It was a woman, but her features were distorted, almost robotic. Jamal, the woman said, her voice cold and calculating. We've been waiting for this moment. The time is now. Jamal's stomach churned. Who are you? What do you want from me? The woman's eyes glowed unnaturally bright. We want you to join us. We've been preparing you for this moment your entire life. You're going to help us shape the future. But first, you have to make a choice. You can either accept your role, or you can walk away and forget all of this. The decision is yours. Jamal's mind was spinning. The weight of the truth was suffocating, and for a moment, he felt as if he couldn't breathe. He turned to his mother, then to Clara, but their faces were as conflicted as his own. This was too big. Too dangerous. But then, as the woman's voice echoed in his mind, something inside Jamal clicked. This wasn't about fate. It wasn't about a bigger plan. It was about control. And for the first time in his life, Jamal realized that no one else was going to decide his future for him. With a final glance at the people around him, Greg, Clara, his mother, and the man with the briefcase, Jamal made his choice. He wasn't going to let anyone pull the strings anymore. The time for playing along was over. But as he stepped forward, ready to make his move, the woman's distorted voice filled the room one last time. Chillingly, you think you can escape this? You're already too far gone. In that moment, everything changed. Jamal stood frozen, the words of the woman still echoing in his ears. You think you can escape this? You're already too far gone. The finality of her statement sent a chill down his spine, but it also ignited something in him, something he had been unaware of until now. It was a feeling of defiance, of not letting anyone control his life or dictate his future. Jamal knew then that his choices mattered, and no matter how tangled this web had become, he wasn't going to be anyone's pawn. For a brief moment, everything went still. The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for his next move. His hands trembled slightly as he glanced at the people around him. His mother, Vanessa, was watching him with a mixture of concern and pride. Clara, though shaken, seemed ready to follow his lead. The man with the briefcase stood like a silent sentinel, and Greg's expression was unreadable. Jamal didn't look back at the woman on the screen. He wasn't afraid anymore. He had spent too many years letting others pull the strings, his mother, the strangers in his life, even the city he lived in. He realized now that true power came from making his own decisions, regardless of the consequences. Enough, Jamal said, his voice steady. I'm not part of your plan. I'm not going to be manipulated by anyone. The woman's image on the screen flickered as if surprised by his resolve. You really think you can walk away from this? The foundation has already been set. Jamal shook his head. Maybe you've been planning for years, but I've got something you don't have. My own choices. And I'm making one now. He turned to his mother. Vanessa had always been his protector, the one who shielded him from the dangers of the world. Jamal had never fully understood why she was so guarded, but now, it all made sense. She had known. She had always known that there was something out there trying to control them, to use them for something bigger. And she had tried to protect him from it. He could see it now in the way she looked at him, proud, but also relieved. We can leave this all behind, Jamal said softly. We don't have to be part of their game. Vanessa reached out, her hand gently touching his shoulder. I've always wanted you to have a choice, Jamal. I didn't want to drag you into this world of lies and secrets. But I see now you're stronger than I realized. Clara, who had been standing silently at the edge of the room, stepped forward. We've all been pawns in this. But we don't have to stay that way. We can break free from whatever they want us to do. Jamal nodded, a feeling of determination settling over him. It's over. We're not their puppets. The man with the briefcase spoke up, his voice cold. You think you can just walk away? The consequences of defying us will be severe. But Jamal wasn't intimidated. He had already made up his mind. The danger was real, but so was his desire for freedom. Do your worst. I'm not afraid. For a brief moment, it seemed like the room was holding its breath again. The woman's face on the screen flickered, her expression twisted with anger and disbelief. But then, in an instant, the entire system crashed. The screen went dark, and the hum of the building seemed to vanish into an eerie silence. Jamal's heart raced as he realized what had just happened. They had cut off the connection. The plan that had been orchestrated around him, the web of control and manipulation, had unraveled in a heartbeat. The people in the room, Greg, the man with the briefcase, looked as though they were completely unprepared for what had just occurred. They stood motionless, as if they hadn't anticipated anyone having the power to say no. Clara let out a shaky breath. I think we did it. We stopped them. Greg, his face pale, took a step back, his gaze flicking between Jamal and Vanessa. His earlier bravado was gone. You don't understand. You think you've won? You've only just scratched the surface. Jamal wasn't listening anymore. He was done with the fear, the manipulation, the hidden agendas. This was his life, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. He turned to his mother, who nodded silently, a quiet understanding passing between them. Let's go home, Jamal said. They walked out of the building, leaving behind the secrets, the danger, and the shadows that had been looming over their lives for far too long. The cool night air was a welcome relief, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jamal breathed freely. As they walked through the empty streets, Clara, who had been walking beside them, spoke softly. It's over. But I think there's more to the story. There's still a lot we don't know. Jamal glanced at her, his mind already racing with questions. I know. But for now, we've stopped them. And that's enough. Vanessa looked at her son, a proud smile on her face. You made the right choice, Jamal. I knew you had it in you all along. Jamal smiled back, but there was a seriousness in his eyes now. The battle isn't over, but we've taken the first step. And that's all I need to know. As they made their way home, the night seemed quieter, the world less heavy. Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that they had just avoided something dangerous, something much bigger than they could have ever imagined. The threads of this story, this plan that had been woven around them, had come undone, but the mystery wasn't gone. It was just beginning to unfold. But for now, Jamal was content to walk away from it. He had his freedom, his family, and the knowledge that his choices, his voice, mattered. No one could take that from him. As they disappeared into the night, the faintest whisper echoed in Jamal's mind, this isn't the end. And perhaps it wasn't. But for now, it felt like the start of something new. Something hopeful. Something he could control. And that was enough to keep walking forward, one step at a time.